Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Just in case you don't know who I am, my name is Becca Syme. Sorry, that was not intentional. What I meant was, the reason I'm introducing myself is we are going to get so nerdy in this session that if you are here expecting 10 easy tips for how to unscrew your brain, this is not the session for you. You may want to leave now because you're going to be mad at me in about 15 minutes, let alone 45. But the reason I introduce who I am, I have a master's degree. The background that I have is basically in industrial and organizational psychology. My goal is to help authors understand why they are or are not having the success that they are or are not having. And if they want it, the goal is to get them to it. And if they're already having it, is how do we protect it? And the way that I do that, and the reason I'm explaining this is because I'm going to say some stuff you will not like. And I'm going to say some stuff that probably some of you will want to get up and leave, and that's fine. Also, if you get up and leave, I'm not assuming that you're leaving because you're mad at me. That's not true, but pretend that that's not true. I'm joking. But I know that this stuff is going to be challenging for some of us, so I want to lay some groundwork first. I spend my days primarily coaching individual authors. So when I tell you that I've coached 6,000 plus individual authors, I mean not that I've had a group of 700 people, however many mathy times it takes to get to 6,000. What I mean is I have sat across from individual authors for 45 minutes or more than 6,000 times individually. What that means is I see patterns on such a macro level in this industry that I see patterns differently than people who are primarily talking about a system or a formula that they have that they're teaching. And the reason that's important to understand is I'm not going to give you the easy steps to success, but I am hoping to teach you how to find it for yourself. That's the goal. But it means we have to get nerdy. And if you've seen my Facebook post from this morning, you know I rewrote this talk this morning to be even nerdier. So buckle up, my friends, because we're going to get into it. Okay, so the most common mindset talks that you're going to hear, not just here, but everywhere, the most common mindset talks boil down to one word, and that's the word just. Here are some examples. Just think positive. Just stop thinking. Just do the work. Just. The problem is when we're hearing this and we don't know how to do that thing, we don't know that that's why we are overwhelmed when we're listening. That's why we're frustrated. That's why we can't execute whatever mindset thing it is that we're being told that we should be able to execute. We do not know how to do the thing, and even when we have a formula for how to do it, there's something missing for us. And what that looks like is I go to a talk and it doesn't resonate. I go to a talk, I listen to a workshop, I listen to a podcast, and I get overwhelmed or frustrated. Or I try to execute the thing and it doesn't work. And if you know me and the work I do, my goal is anyone can tell you what worked for them, and they can say it might not work for you, but they can't tell you why it won't work for you. My job is to tell you why it won't work for you and then how to fix it. So we're going to dig a little bit into this today. So whatever it is that we can't do, when we can't do the just, we end up in this spot where we're feeling a feeling. We're sitting in a room feeling a feeling. And what we do instead of shutting down is we try to fix ourselves. Well, there's clearly something wrong with me. I am deficient in some way. The good news is I'm here to tell you what's wrong with you. But it's nothing. There's nothing wrong with you. There's also nothing wrong with the speaker. It's not that the speaker shouldn't be saying what they're saying. It is that you don't realize that you don't have what's called an intact skill chain in this area. We'll get nerdy about that in a second. But you want to execute it. You want to do the thing. I'm a thinker. Any thinkers in the room? Any high intellections if you're in Clifton Strengths? Yeah. I'm a thinker. If you tell me to just stop thinking, I don't know how to do that. That is not a thing that is unique and natural to my brain. And because of the way that my brain works and the complexity of what it means to have that particular talent cluster, it means that I struggle more to execute on that particular just than other people will. And no one knows why that happens unless they know my brain and they know how to fix that particular skill chain. So the reason you can't do whatever just it is because your brain is so different and on such a micro level, and those micro level differences make such an important, like catastrophic, cataclysmic difference in how we can assimilate action. But that is not intuitive to us. What is intuitive to us is what's wrong with me. I'm doing it wrong. Let me go ask questions. Let me figure out how to execute this. But that's not actually what's wrong. So the specifics of what is happening and the specifics of why this is important is when you have a higher level speed of assimilation of making a decision, it is going to be easier for you to execute that skill and you're not going to see it. So if you ask me to think about something, I'm super good at thinking, like amazingly good at thinking. But if you tell someone who doesn't have that talent cluster to just think about it, they're going to get overwhelmed or they're not going to want to do it, or it's not going to help them at all to go think about stuff. But if I am so certain, and again, those of you who've heard me talk before, the certainty and correctness are not relevant to each other. You can be completely certain and also completely incorrect. They are inverse proportionate. You can be completely uncertain and also completely correct, but we don't intuitively feel that on a biological level in our cells. We assume that if we are uncertain, we must be incorrect, and so we try to fix ourselves. So the goal of this talk is to get at those skill chains. So when someone says just, they have these intact skill chains, and if you see the picture of the person walking up the stairs, right? Essentially, an intact skill chain is a set of micro skills that build upon each other. And you need the skills. Think about math, right? Think about how we learn to math. We have to build the skills in order to be able to do a more advanced level of skill. And those skills have to all be intact because they are directly relevant to each other. They cause betterment in that direction. So what happens when you're really good at something is that you have a whole bunch of discrete skills that have been built on top of each other. Some of them are innate to you, and some of them are things you have learned and developed over time, but you don't know the difference between those. So you might not have a capacity for something, but someone is trying really hard to convince you that you have to do it, and you don't know how to do it, and that's evidence of a non-intact skill chain. It is not evidence of a deficiency. So when you have a missing link in that skill chain, you are never going to be able to accomplish the just until you fix the missing link in the skill chain. And when I say never, I mean never. It is not possible because the skills are directly relevant to each other. So that's the first nerdy part. Let's talk about some examples. Just be kind. How many of you have said this to your children before? Guess what? Not all kids have the skills to be kind. Us telling someone to just be kind. So here's an example of a skill chain of kindness. If you cannot produce the ability to feel other people's feelings or the desire to make other people feel good in a moment, you cannot practice kindness intentionally. So when we tell someone just be kind, if they either have a missing skill chain of, well, they don't know that people are not happy with them. They don't know that they're being unkind because they can't tell how other people are feeling from moment to moment on any level. So they don't practice the skill of being kind to people in the moment, not because they're mean or stupid, but because they were not developed in a way that gave them the skill, or they have a personality that is antithetical to that skill of being able to read people's emotions and tell the kind of impact you're having on someone. You can tell people to just be kind all day long. If you have an intact skill chain in that way, you know what you are doing, but they don't. Just analyze the patterns. Thank you for that. That was great. That was a great illustration. When you do not have the ability to parse between data and make meaning out of the difference between data sets, you are not going to be able to analyze your ad data. It is not possible for you to do that on a conscious level. So you either have to learn how to do that missing skill, or you need to stop expecting yourself to do this. So the pain point in this area is that the majority of us do not know when we have a skill chain that is missing or when we have an unintact skill chain. All we think is we see the outcome of it. We see the frustration in ourselves. We see the lack of ability to assimilate the skill. And what happens, especially in the productivity industrial complex, is we try to motivate ourselves to want it more in order to get it done. If I want to not think at a 10 out of 10, then I'll just not think anymore. How has that worked out for us in the past? 0. It doesn't work. But if you can understand that there is a skill chain to being able, so here's those of you who are high thinkers, here's your skill chain that you're missing, the skill. To be okay being uncertain when you make a decision. To be okay being uncertain when you make a decision is the skill that most of us do not have worked out well enough when we are thinkers and we overthink. Because people who can do that, when they say, well, just stop thinking, they either have learned, developed, or came born with, factory installed, the ability to not care about certainty when they're making a decision. There are trauma responses that can affect this, there are personality factors that can affect this, and there are actual learned skills that can affect this. But when you don't know that that's what's going on, what you feel is overwhelmed and ashamed. And that's not going to fix anything. Emotions are supposed to be productive. So when you feel an emotion, you're supposed to do something because of the emotion. That's why we have emotions. If you're feeling ashamed or overwhelmed and it's not causing you to do something, then that is evidence of a not intact skill chain. And again, some of us have not intact skill chains for biological reasons, trauma, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not going to say that 15 times, but I just want to underline there are all kinds of reasons. The goal is to figure out where those are going awry, why they're happening, and what we can do about it. So I need to tell you a quick story. Those of you who've heard the speed reader story before, we're going to go a little bit deeper into it to explain why this is so important. So there was a study that was done decades ago trying to understand how people develop skills. And the specific purpose of this study was to see if we gave you the world's best teacher and you are an average speed reader, could we make you into an above average speed reader just by having the world's best teacher teach you? That was the goal outcome of this. So they split the group up, the readers who had no training in speed reading, they split the group up into 2 groups. The average group started off at 90 words a minute, which is solidly in the middle of average. And the above average group started off at 350 words a minute, which is way outside of average already. So you already have a huge disparity. They both took the same speed reading class from a 10 out of 10 teacher to develop their capacity to do this. And the average group went from 90 to 150, which is still average. The above average group went from 350 to 3,000 words a minute. This is what I mean when I say we don't understand the import of this. We don't understand the import of intact skill chains. We're trying to motivate ourselves, shame ourselves, change ourselves when all we need to do, and I don't mean all we need to do like, oh, it's just this easy. But what I do mean is it is not evidence that you're broken or wrong. It's not evidence that you're stupid, that you don't want it enough. It's not evidence that there is something massive that you need to change about yourself. It is evidence that you don't have that skill, or, as Alex pointed out to me, thank you, Alex, that you don't have the capacity to develop that skill at the level you need to be excellent. Because what that speed reader story means, and I apologize, some of you are not going to like this. Some of us are going to suck at some stuff, you guys. We don't like hearing that. We're like, no, everybody can be excellent at everything. Let's look at the data. The data says no, they can't. So we need to stop. We need to question the premise of the assumption that it is possible for us to be excellent at everything. The reason that's important is we are wasting our time trying to develop average skills into excellent skills when we could instead be spending time developing above average skills into excellent skills and get more development out of the same amount of time that we're spending. So the purpose of this talk is to make you into a better decision maker about where you're going to let yourself be overwhelmed, where you're going to let yourself be frustrated, where you're going to let yourself spin your wheels. The goal of this talk is nothing other than to give you a tool to question the premise of your own assumptions when you are listening to people tell you what you should be doing with your time. And this isn't just about writing. This isn't just about running your writing business. This is everywhere in the world. This is not limited to only places where we're in school. This is all skills in all places. So, the reader speed story is important because we have to be able to understand just how much we need to focus our learning in only places where it's going to make a significant impact. And the way you tell the difference is almost 100% of the time is your own overwhelm, your own frustration. And there are a lot of people who are really, really good at learning, all of you learners and who are literally ready to throw tomatoes at me right now. Because you're like, don't tell people not to learn, Becca. Everybody needs to learn. Yeah, you do, because you're really, really good at it. You have a 3,000 words per minute capacity to learn. Think about the people who are the worst at learning. We don't need to tell them to learn all the things. We need to tell them to focus their time on only learning the very most important stuff and let the rest of it go. Because learning all the things is not for them. Getting better at all the things is not for them. And again, I coach at volume, people. And again, I know a lot of you are not arguing with me in your head, but some of you are. Stop it. So I have to say something really quick because I know a lot of you in this room are delivering talks this week. If you are delivering a talk this week, this talk is not for you on your stages. If you are delivering a talk, you are not the person who needs to be the decider about worrying about how people are assimilating your talk. This talk is for me who is sitting in the audience. It is not the job of the advice giver to change what they are saying. It is the job of the people in the audience to read my own overwhelm, to read my own personality, to know myself better, to understand skill chain blocks well enough to know when to move on. And again, some of you are like, this is like 101 level stuff, Becca, right? Because you're good at it. For those of us who are not good at it, so I can feel crowd emotions. The emotions in the crowd are overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. And not just at this conference, but in general in the industry. We are overwhelmed, and a lot of us are frustrated. And that is a signal that we are not narrowing enough into the places that are going to be the most important for us. We are too worried about assimilating everything, and we are not listening to our own overwhelm enough. But I needed to say this because I don't want any of you who are giving talks to feel like you're not allowed to say what you're going to say. Say it loud and proud. Because the people that it's going to resonate for and it's going to work for, when they have an intact skill chain, they're going to nail it. They're going to kill it. But the people who don't have an intact skill chain, us in the audience, when we're feeling that, we need to know when to opt out and when to say no. And that is a hard thing for the majority of us who have high stakes. We care a lot about doing this job. We want to do it as well as we can, as long as we can. We want to succeed. And anytime there is high stakes and uncertainty, that is a danger zone for making bad decisions. We just need to be better decision makers in general. Okay, all right. So as the consumers of shoulds, we need to be better about making decisions, la la la. I.e., your motivation is not the problem. You don't need to want it more. But in this talk, I want to cover some of the justs and then talk about what skills are often missing. And I'm going to pause here just for a quick second to say, I am not going to be able to get through all of these because I packed it tight, knowing that I was going to have to cut some of them. But what I will do is if you ask me a question in the Platinum Room Facebook group, at me, I will answer whatever your questions are. And then anything that I don't cover in this talk specifically, we're going to cover on the quick cast eventually. But I want to do the two really, really big ones that we hear a lot in the author community. And I want to cover likely what skills are missing when we are not able to assimilate these things. First one, you're afraid to fail. So I talk about these intact skill chains in terms of the version 1.0 and version 2.0, because the 2.0 is I have figured out, solved the right problem, and now I can have an intact skill chain. 1.0 still has a bug in it somewhere, and we got to find the bug, right? So in the productivity industrial complex, these are the talks that are about fear of failure. So this is just don't be afraid, right? What does it sound like? Failure's helpful. I learn best when I fail. My success is built on my failures. And those of you who have this fear of failure, you are feeling it right now. Even just reading those sentences is making you be like, who are these aliens who can think this way? And the answer is they have a 3,000 words per minute capacity that you do not have. It's okay. We'll either fix this with some of these skills, or you will decide this is not the place for you to worry about, because frankly, some of us don't need to worry about this. But this is what version 2.0 sounds like when it's intact. Version 1.0, though, sounds like, but Becca, I can't make a mistake. I'm not allowed to make mistakes. Or you're saying this to yourself subconsciously and you're not realizing it. You're so terrified of making the mistake that you don't actually know that you're saying this to yourself. I must be perfect, though. Mistakes are bad to make. So this is what it sounds like inside of your head. These are not the same skill chains. Version 2.0 is intact. 1.0, you arrest out at whatever level of skill you don't have. Here are some of the possible options for skills that you don't have. Number one is trauma. It is possible that you are dealing with a fear that is terror level. You are physically responding when we start talking about failure. That is a place that we solve with specifically trauma-relevant therapy. That's the diagnosis, and in terms of like your skill chain is broken here. So those of you who are here, you especially don't want to listen to the justs in this area, because listening to the justs will create more fear, which will create more fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Like, it won't help. So Healing past trauma, we want to do that if we can, and specifically as it relates to security and safety. Here's a big one. When we are afraid that if our books don't sell, then something bad is going to happen, whatever that bad thing is. I'm not going to get my dream career. I'm not going to be able to leave my day job. I'm not going to be able to, whatever you're filling the blank in that area. If the stakes are too high in this fear, I have a lack of security that it's going to be okay. The only way to fix this is to increase the security in something besides my book selling. Because what I can't do is promise you your books will sell. No one can. What I can't do is promise you it's going to be okay. You're going to get everything you've ever wanted. I mean, I could say that to you. I could absolutely say that to you. But from a data perspective, I can't say that to you. What I can say is there is a chance. There is an equal chance. But if I arrest out of that skill chain and I don't have security in whether my books sell or not, in something other than that, then I'm going to continue to arrest out in my fear of failure. I'm always going to be afraid of it. And some of us are really afraid to increase our security in something besides our book selling. Come to my afternoon talk. We're going to talk more about that. Author for Life. Find supportive friends who will equalize you. This is a skill that I want to be conscious of how I talk about this, because some of us are massively introverted and some of us really, really do not want to make friends, and I get that. People are the worst. They're awful, I mean, objectively. People as like people, but like individual people, well, I mean, they're fine sometimes, but some of us really do not excel at making friends. We arrest out a lot in breaking the ice. We arrest out of the skill chain in knowing what to say to strangers. We arrest out in being comfortable around people we don't know, right? So if you are arresting out of the skill chain of making networking connections, it is not because you just need to like people more. It is not because you just need to believe in yourself. It's literally you don't have a skill. And if we can give you that skill, then you can have an easier time. But again, some of us are 150 words a minute level at making friends. And that is not a bad thing. Not everybody needs 150 friends. Some of you just died a little inside at that number. But some of us only need one. Like, that's all we need. And that friend can have 150 friends, and then you're fine. But when you don't have an intact skill chain, and Becca says, hey, one of the solves for fear of failure is having people who can equalize you and remind you when you start to spiral that you are going to be okay, though, because this is a long game. But you need people who can do that. If you can't produce that inside of your own head, no amount of motivation is going to solve that problem. The last piece of this about fear of failure is staying emotionally above the line. And we're going to talk about emotions, I apologize. But when we talk about emotionally above the line, I mean there is a line where everything is just copacetic and fine. And then above that, there's elation, excitement, joy, right? There's like way, way, way above the line. I don't mean up here. I mean I'm fine emotionally. There's nothing that's dragging me down. There's nothing that's worrying me. And some of you are already going below the line. Take a breath. Take another breath. But when I say being above the line, this is a skill that a lot of us were not taught in childhood. We were not taught how to appropriately deal with our emotions in the moment. And then we get very quickly and easily emotionally overwhelmed, and we don't know that that's what's happening. We just know that we all of a sudden break. But if we can have the ability to stay clear of emotions in terms of like, when I did this work myself when I was 28, which was a long, long time ago. When I did this work myself, the goal was to be aware of my emotions on a regular enough basis that I wasn't overwhelmed at any point by one of the emotions going out of control, because I was always above the line enough that I could handle what was coming at me. This is a skill that some of us need so much. It's called emotional regulation, and being emotionally dysregulated is the diagnosis of emotional dysregulation. If this is a place where you struggle, this is a place I want you, like if this is nailing you, I want you to read Laurel Mellon's work, Mellin. This is work that's worth doing for you, because both of the big skills we're going to talk about, we may actually get to 3 of them, fear of failure and fear of success. Both of the big skills we're going to talk about here are, this is a very important part of it. Because if I was taught as a child how to regulate my emotions, I have a much easier time dealing with adversity as it comes at me. Oh, there's change coming at me. Okay, I'm not going into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I'm able to emotionally regulate. And we don't like to talk about this stuff because it feels soft and touchy-feely, but I am telling you the difference between being able to be okay with failure in a high percentage of us and not being okay with it is this skill. So this is a place that, again, if it's hitting you, do this work. So who was at Sasha's keynote? Yeah? The failure equals success, right? That equation, that's the learning curve. So a lot of us struggle with being comfortable with the learning curve. And again, this is a block of skills. If you're struggling with the earlier ones that I talked about, there's a likelihood that this one will also be a struggle. There's a higher likelihood. So fix those other ones first. But once we get to this place, this is the place where failure equals success, where when I can internalize that, and I know that we're in a long game, and I know that failure is necessary. And when I do the Author for Life talk this afternoon, we'll talk more about the game itself and why it's important to think of it that way. When you can understand that the learning curve is a good and beneficial thing, and you need and want to do it in order to be successful, then that is usually the last of the skills in the skill chain that needs to really be internalized when we struggle with fear of failure. Okay. So the next one we're going to talk about is you're afraid to succeed. And the fear of success in particular is almost always sounds like this. No, the version 2.0 sounds like this. Think of all that success. Success is amazing. Just think about all that money. Think of all that fame. Think of all those readers who will read your books. And some of you are literally going below the line right now as you're listening to this. And that is evidence that there's some overwhelm or some need for an intact skill chain in that particular area. So when you hear, just think about all that fame, just think about all that money, and you have a version 1.0 in your head, what it sounds like to you is attention is bad. I can't draw attention. Success brings bad things to me. What if I do something wrong? Just a quick side note, if you haven't heard me say this, if you are asking yourselves rhetorical questions like this, what if I do this, what if I do that, and all it's doing is leading to more rhetorical questions, answer the rhetorical questions. Don't ask yourself rhetorical questions. Answer them with a plan. So what happens if I do something wrong? And again, the first of the skills in here is going to be therapy, because some of us may need therapy about this particular thing, and I don't want to minimize that, but I just want to not spend a lot of time on it. So if it's trauma, please heal the past trauma. And again, I don't want to minimize it, but if it comes from a strength or a benign place, like a fear of success is, it can sound like sometimes achiever in the Clifton Strengths, if you're familiar with strengths. It can sometimes sound like restorative in the Clifton Strengths, and what those two sound like is, but I'm not successful enough, but there's always more success in front of me. Or it is, restorative is, I got to solve all the problems, that are going to happen if I'm successful. And I got to solve them all today before I'm successful so that I don't have them in the future. Any strategics, you just got called out as well. So when you have those particular types of skills, and the reason I differentiate between like a missing skill, like I have a missing skill of emotional regulation, versus when it's coming from a strength place or a benign place, it actually can be good for you to think that way if it is producing good things. So here's the other piece that I think is really important. Some of us have a fear of failure and a fear of success that is healthy and beneficial, and we don't need to fix it. And the way that you know is that it produces good things for you and it doesn't produce stress or overwhelm. When it produces stress or overwhelm, then that's where we're in danger, okay? So, partner up ability. I apologize for hitting all the introverts just really hard, but so often having the right person to support you in your life is the answer to an awful lot of these issues. But to be fair, this person could be a therapist. It doesn't necessarily have to be a friend. It's just if you're calling your therapist a lot, you're spending a lot of money. And if you're providing beneficial support for a friend, hopefully they're not charging you for it. But, I mean, they might be. I don't know your friends. I don't know your life. But partner up ability in particular is different from just finding groups of people. Partner up ability is finding a person who vibes with you in a way that you need them to vibe. In terms of, if I'm a person who really needs to talk, I need to find people who like to listen. They do exist because I talk way too much, and I have friends who like to listen, thank God. But people who don't like to talk need people who like to talk also. People who don't like to break the ice need people who like to break the ice. And the reason I specifically say partner up ability is some of us need to have we may need to hire someone to help us with this, like a therapist, or we may need to wait until we find the right person. So in that case, getting on the task of finding that person is important, or finding those people is important. And this is a great place to do that, networking. If you are having a fear about not having a good skill of ice breaking, come and hang around one of us who are extroverts, and we will just adopt you. That's what we do. Here's a really important one in the fear of success skill chain, is making plans for what will happen when success happens. And what I'm not talking about are things like, what am I going to do with all that money? Isn't that exciting? Because for some of us, that's really scary to think about having all that money. What I mean is, if success happens to you, you have people in this industry who can help you manage it. You are not alone. If success happens to you, there are financial advisors, there are people who are mentors and coaches out there, there are other friends in the industry, other successful people, and they know how to connect you to people. There's always someone that you can find if you know where to look. And again, if you're here, you know where to look because this is where you look, right? Again, we have to break the ice and ask, which is sometimes a pain point for some of us, but it's possible. So when we have a fear in this particular area and fear of success, we may be creating a fear for ourselves because we don't have barriers of protection. So the other side of this, not just financial, is potentially emotional. So if I get a whole bunch of people loving my book, then I'm going to feel all the feelings of all the people who like my book. And I don't know what I'm going to do if that happens. You hire someone to manage your audience for you, and you stop being in contact with your audience. That's how you handle that. So again, being able to solve the precise place that we're missing the skill is so important. And some of us get overwhelmed just thinking about this stuff. If you have questions, please come and find me. Please at me in the Facebook group. I think this is the last one I'm going to talk about in this particular skill. This is so important. Some of us need to cut out voices that are consistently telling us that we shouldn't be succeeding. And again, there's a skill chain just attached to this that almost always starts with therapy. So if this is a place where you're struggling, I would say it is so important to find someone who can help you walk through this. But the majority of our mindset issues when it comes to fear of success are tied to having either a plan of what's going to happen when we are finally successful, or having a plan for how to create the barriers around us. Okay, and then again, stay emotionally above the line as much as you can, and increase security in something besides book selling. Those are both important. Come back to the talk this afternoon. Okay. Ooh, we might get to both of these. Okay. You worry that you're an imposter. So version 1.0 sounds like, version 2.0 sounds like, just embrace being an imposter because you're the best kind of imposter. You're one that no one can see. Aren't you excited that you're so good at being an imposter that no one knows you're an imposter? Those of us who struggle with imposter syndrome, which by the way I do, we know that that's not helpful, because when we don't have an intact skill chain when it comes to understanding imposter syndrome, we just assume that our brain is always right. Here's the first skill that most of us need to learn. Your brain lies to you a lot. It lies to you a lot. And the best example is I can get on Facebook really quick. Liar. What does the data say? Okay. Version 1.0 feels very freezing. It is, what if people discover that I don't know what I'm doing? What if I can't keep this up? What if I can't replicate this? Who am I to do this thing? All of these questions, if you struggle with imposter syndrome, sound very realistic and reliable to you because you can answer all of these questions. What's going to happen is I'm going to lose my community. Everyone's going to hate me. No one's going to want to be around me anymore. We know exactly what's going to happen. And we don't know our brains are lying to us in that way because it's trying to be helpful. And this is the key. When your brain is lying to you like this, it is trying to be helpful. So again, if it's trauma, we do need therapy about this, but let me just say, a huge percentage of this can be solved with remembering that imposters cannot have imposter syndrome. It's a syndrome, you guys. They named it because we are not imposters and we think that we are. That's the literal definition of the syndrome. So when you have that feeling, you know that it is not true because your brain lies to you and because imposters can't have imposter syndrome. That doesn't mean you're going to stop feeling like an imposter, but it does mean that you can start talking back to the part of your brain that is convinced that you are. Because I am saying that it's a syndrome because it is a syndrome, not because I want it to be. It actually is not true. The people who care about belonging, about doing it correctly, are the people who belong by nature. The people who don't belong don't care if they do or not. So that's important. Okay. Oh, man, the time gets away from me. Okay. I'm going to land with one quick thing to say. I had one more skill, and I'm just going to show you what it is because this is an important one. Those of us who cannot connect with a positive future, those of us who cannot imagine that it's going to be okay, that it's going to get better, that there is something better coming, that the future is open. When we hear things like, think of all the great things that can happen, everybody changes, just get on board, but what if you fly? So I had a client once who was like, what if you fly? Right, but what if I do fall? Right? So that is an actual problem for those of us who do not have intact skill chains. And I'm just going to say this, and I apologize for everybody that this offends. If you can't think about the future in a way that produces positive certainty, you shouldn't be thinking about the future. And it's not to say that there won't be bad things that happen. It's to say that when your job is to think about the future in terms of like, how do we navigate these things, you should have an intact skill chain of feeling like, but we're going to be able to find a way through this. And now I'm coming back from the future, and I'm going to help you get to a place where we can get through this together. That is literally the goal of people who think about the future. So if you are having worry and fear about something that's happening in the future, I want to encourage you. We're going to do, and I'm out of time, I apologize. There's a link. Let me get to it at the very end. Hang on. It's betterfasteracademy.com/20books. The slides are all on here. You can see all of them. We're going to do a series of the justs on the QuitCast upcoming. So if you follow the QuitCast on YouTube, I'm going to do more presentations like this in the future. I will see you all at the Author for Life talk this afternoon. I hope everybody has a great rest of your conference. Thanks for listening.